Yeah, it's sort of digital. Yeah. Yeah. New. Basically just a lens from the sensor. There's no Oh, it's mainly for space. So it allows the camera to audio. Yeah. What's that?
Okay, hello everyone. My name's Ian Lintner. I work over at Web Filings and Aims, which is now called Workiva. I've been a web developer developing websites for a little over 10 years. I've worked at a number of places. Most of my experience has been agency, so marketing, that type of thing, so building like public websites and intranets and things like that. So I'd like to share some of my experience that I've had building websites and some of the areas that things have gone wrong. So without further ado, my presentation today is how to fail at building websites and a lot of other things.
You're in good company, just to make you feel. We failed too.
So I had this up before, but I have a URL to link to the presentation and SlideShare. I think we're going to be able to post these to the DrupalCorn website too afterwards. So I'll talk to Michael about that because I had a question about that. But I think we're hopefully going to be posting these to the presentations afterwards. Since this presentation is talking about failure, I'm going to say that everything here is true, mostly. The names have been changed to protect the innocent because you don't want to be outing anyone, any clients, or any people that I've worked with. So, kind of as talking about failure, so this great quote from Honda is, success represents 1% of your work, the other 99% is called failure. And that's really true with building anything, any creative endeavor or any technology endeavor. There's a lot of work that gets thrown away. There's a lot of your time that you're just, you put things in, try it out, see what sticks, throw it against the wall, And a lot of times people don't like designs, they don't like, the way the website works or looks, or, the navigation or what content's on there. And so a lot of things end up getting rewritten, redesigned, reworked. It's a big part of the web design process. So kind of how I'm going to break this presentation up is I'm going to talk a little bit about how website projects fail, why do they fail. I'm going to dive a little deeper into kind of the psychology of failure, why people make bad decisions, and kind of some of the actual science and psychology that underlies all of that, because there's a lot of interesting things that kind of go into that and how people act in certain situations or how they think and perceive the world and perceive mental models of like technology and websites. Then finally, I'm going to talk about how we can mitigate failure, different ways to look at the whole process and cycle of building things. And then finally, I'm going to try to apply this to web projects since this is a conference on Drupal and Drupal is a web CMS. So a big caveat I want to talk about with web design is when you're building a project, failure is relative to the observer. There are many times that I've built a project that I'm not happy with, but the client's happy with, or the person I'm building it for is very happy with it. But there's something in the project, the design, the technology, the code, something that I'm just not quite I could have done that better. So we really have to step back from what we're doing and kind of realize who this is for and what they expect. And I want to bring up this website just because this is wonderful. And I really mean this. And so, some of us as designers, we would look at this and go, oh my God, what is this? But the person who builds this website, or the person who this is for, probably loves this. This is the success. The fact that we're talking about this right now, it's gone from the point of being so bad that it's entertaining. It's kind of like campy B movies. People look at this website just to see it, So it has popularity. Yeah, you came in at the perfect time.
Yeah. I like to play stupid games to top right.
Yeah, I mean, everything on here is,
Oh my god.
yeah, if you've never seen this one before. My favorite is the chicken. So if we kind of look at that and step back, we can see that, you know, they obviously want that website to be like that. And I've worked on some websites where I'm like, oh my God, they're cramming everything into the front page. And that's okay because that's what they want. You know, it may not be the best user experience, it may not be the best design, but at the end of the day, you know, we're building a product for someone and it's about what they want. So sometimes we have to adjust our own point of view rather than, you know, we can be experts to a point, but at a certain time you just got to go with it. So we'll talk about why the website design process and building websites and designing websites is so prone to failure. The big issue is websites are really the intersection of design, communication, and technology. So we really have three big areas that we're looking at. So we're kind of dealing with this marketing, communication, copywriting, all of this stuff, content strategy, and then we have a design perspective, and so we have designers creating creative mock-ups and things like that, and then we have a technology perspective. So where someone may be really good at doing design, they may not know the technology, or they may not be a writer. So the larger the project gets, the less likely you are going to be able to have one person do everything. And the more people you involve, the project gets bigger, it requires management. And what really happens is on most projects, you don't have someone who can really manage the whole circle of all of this. Because you really can't have someone who manages every little piece. They aren't going to be experts in all of it. They may be experts in 2 or 3 or different things. And so we have all of these different tasks that are going on in this process. And depending on how sophisticated it is, I mean, you can really drill into it. You can have people whose job it is just to write A/B tests for the website and test what color buttons are. I mean, this is stuff that the big players like Amazon do. They are really concerned with conversion of like different button colors, link colors, little itty bitty things. For most of us day to day, most of the websites we're going to be working on are not going to be that detailed. So we have to kind of have kind of a teeter-totter or kind of decide how much effort we're going to put into these areas and kind of balance it for each website project. And I mean, when you actually look at all of these things, it's really complex. There's a lot to do. So going a little deeper into this, so when we look at website projects, why they fail is one of the biggest ones is expectations, unrealistic goals for a project. A lot of times, a lot of people want a website, you know, they want Amazon, they want Microsoft, or they want Apple's website. They want a website, you know, that's a Fortune 500 website with all of the bells and whistles and everything that these companies have, or an e-commerce system that rivals eBay or Amazon. And I mean, there's many a times I've had someone come in and go, I want this product, but I want it to be mine. Or I want YouTube, but for my website. Or I want eBay for my website, or something like that. So, I mean, there's really an expectation setting, and if that doesn't happen, the project's really kind of doomed from the get-go, because, I mean, the resources that it takes to build something like that, you really are not going to be doing that on a, you know, small or medium scale. Another big point of failure, estimates. People are really bad at estimates, and I'm going to dig into this estimate portion with a little bit of data on a study that was done, but basically, people are really bad at estimating. We can get okay with it, but estimation is really about the expectation part, and they kind of stem from each other. We also look at, that comes from the expectations and expectations, or the estimates and expectations, are badly defined system requirements. And that comes from trying to define everything that needs to be built. If you come and say, I want an eBay for my website, there's a lot of functionality that you have to define. So it's really about bringing this down, getting the expectation where you need to be, and producing a scope, or at least a project expectation that can be achieved. Poor reporting of project status. That's a big one. depending on how your projects go, and I'm going to talk a little more about the project reporting later on. Unmanaged risks. This is part of the design process where we look at we don't see things coming, or we could have figured out how to look at these risks earlier in the project when they come up later. And some of that is experience, and some of it's working with your stakeholders and the expectations, and trying to flush things out earlier rather than later. And then the final one is poor communication. This is where many projects break down. People aren't talking. Either the developers aren't talking to the designers, the developers aren't talking to the project managers. The project managers may not be talking to the clients as much, or people need to be talking. And this great quote that I had that I had heard from an old guy at a manufacturing company was, just get the right people in the right room and get it done. And I don't know how many projects where that could have solved so many problems of just getting people in one room or on one call and just talking through it. I mean, a lot of times people are assuming things and they could just act. I mean, it's just about, at the end of the day, it just comes down to communication. So kind of continued, these are not as big, but these are little minor items that can really get in there. Sometimes you look at technologies that are a little immature, so right now we're talking about Drupal. If you build something in Drupal 8 and you're trying to build something like you build in Drupal 7, it's probably not going to happen right now. So Drupal 8 is a little immature because it's not released yet and the modules aren't there. Other things we can look at, the leadership side, sometimes people aren't ready to manage a technology project. A lot of times technology projects are more complex than other types of projects. So if you bring someone who's done project management on making print pieces and say, oh, you've done great at print pieces, now manage a website project. That's a big, and so if someone isn't experienced in that, they're going to have a hard time. Other problems you can have is politics within a company. This is a big one. People arguing, wanting certain things on the website just because of politics. Commercial pressures, sometimes the market just requires certain things that the company can't provide, or that they want to put out on a website that their internal business can't support. Also, there's things as human error, sloppy development, sloppy design, sloppy copywriting, sloppy planning. That can snowball failures from the earlier steps. If you have the expectations and the communication solid, usually human error can be taken care of. But human error can make those other things far worse. It's just one of those things where it just snowballs downhill that can make a project just start to go way over budget and way over time. So we'll talk about the different types of failure, as I just kind of outlined all those different points. So as I said, communication is number one. And this is kind of a hierarchy of failure, of points where you can fail. Communication and expectations are the most important. You got to have good leadership, and then following from that, leadership helps create your culture, and then design, planning, and human error, as I said, they're important, but the other ones can kind of compensate for problems in planning and human error. Another big problem that I'm not going to address today because this is more of a business politics thing, but a lot of times businesses can have problems. As you've probably heard of death by committee, that's a big one. You can have dictators who say the website's going to be this way, this is my design, even though they may not know what they're talking about, this is the way I want it, and I'm not going to, that's it. Or you may have someone that is running a project where you really need input from other team members, and they're kind of taking all the time or all the speaking time in meetings. Toxic managers and coworkers, and office and department politics. Those ones are kind of self-explanatory. So, as I said, I'm going to dig kind of into failure right now and the psychology of it. So, getting into this with the psychology. So, we use mental models to kind of view our world. So one of the big issues is designers, developers, we creating the websites, we help them write the content, the project managers, we have a mental model of how the website's going to work. Our user's mental model is completely different, and there's often a disconnect between those two mental models because our users just want to do something on our website. They may want to find some content, they want to buy a widget, they want to, they want to download a document, they want to get a product manual, something like that. They have a goal that they want to achieve, where we have our other set of goals. Maybe we want to sell something, or we want to get lead details, or we want to get, there's different things that we want to achieve, or sometimes it's just sales. But really what we need to do is maybe educate our users before we make a sale, or vice versa. So there's a lot of other points where this disconnect can create a lot of problems. And, flowing through this, as we start to understand our users, we can adjust our mental models. And this is something that I'm going to really emphasize later on in this presentation when we start to get into how to mitigate failure and how to adjust for failure. Is it really comes down to adjusting your mental model of the world to either align with your users or align to the current realities. Because there's a lot of times where we view things a certain way and it's based on our own internal biases, where it may not really be that way, and we're just seeing it from our own rose-colored glasses. So one of the big things is when we get into the psychology of our brain, we're designed to recognize patterns. And this has a big benefit to us in the way we view the world, but it can also lead to a lot of problems. But we're designed to see patterns in things. We're designed to recognize the way projects have gone in the past and see how they go in the future, and all of this thing. But when we look back into, how humans were living before the dawn of technology, when we were hunter-gatherers, when we were farmers, it becomes really important when you need to recognize if something is dangerous or something is safe, where the world we live in now today is mostly safe. We don't have to worry about, getting a cut on our hand and becoming infected, because we can just go to the doctor and get an antibiotic, where, 200 years ago, that could be something that kills you. So the world is a lot different today, and our pattern recognition hasn't necessarily adjusted for the technological world and the world of business. So I'm going to kind of talk quickly about false patterns and false pattern recognitions. So some of you may have heard of Dark Side of the Moon and the Wizard of Oz. And a lot of people probably do this in college or in high school. You put on the Wizard of Oz, you put on Dark Side of the Moon, and you start them at the same time, and different things sync up. And this is kind of it's like people believe there's a conspiracy that, Dark Side of the Moon was created to sync up perfectly with the Wizard of Oz. In all reality, that's probably not the case. But the way it actually ends up syncing up is kind of just a coincidence. And people apply false patterns onto things, so they see this and they go, oh, well, this almost seems like it was designed to be together, but it was just a coincidence. And so getting into this actual issues of why these things happen and why we see errors in projects and things is type 1 and type 2 errors. So I'm going to talk about a couple of cartoon characters here, the Simpsons, and their cartoon characters are caricatures of human behavior in humans. And so really, Marge and Homer are two polar opposites. Marge always errs on the side of safety, which would be a false positive or a type 1 error, and Homer just always, he's more worried about the potential benefits, and dang the consequences, he's going to do it, and he's not too worried about it screwing up. And so as we look at these biases, so as I said, we are kind of hardwired for this pattern recognition. We're hardwired to reduce the number of errors we make, or the actual consequence of the errors. It's far better for us to be safe and avoid something and lose a possible benefit than it is for us to make a bad decision and possibly, bad things happen, drinking water or something that could be poisonous or not healthy. And so we're kind of designed that way. And so, the greatest effect of this is seen when situations are ambiguous. And when this comes down to web projects, there are a lot of times there's a lot of ambiguity in web projects, especially when you're starting out and people say they want certain things or they want a website. A lot of times we'll try to err on the side of caution, but when I was younger, I'd be like, oh, I know how to do that right now. And a lot of times that was wrong because I didn't see the potential loss, and my time wasn't valued as much when I was younger because I could just work a couple of nights and, knock out something else. Now, as I'm older and working overnight a couple of nights really does not work as well when you have to wake up in the morning and you're not, 18, 21 anymore. Once you start to get in your 30s and beyond, things start to slow down and those late nights hurt. So getting back to the type 1, type 2 errors, this is what I was talking about, making a bad decision, but making a bad decision and you being wrong. If Homer eats this sandwich, he's going to feel sick, but he isn't too worried about that. Marge, on the other hand, sees him trying to eat that sandwich and goes, he's going to get sick from eating this, but, and I need to stop him. And so that's really these type 1, type 2 errors, it's really just about either erring on the side of caution or, not worrying about the consequences and you need the potential benefit. So that's really just like a risk analysis. So when we start to get into other decisions, and I talked about biases that we make as people in business or people building websites, our cognitive biases affect what decisions we make, and a lot of those decisions are kind of wired into our brains, and we can start to understand them, so we can kind of have a little bit of metacognition about our decision processes, so we can kind of take into account some of these errors. There are over 100 identified cognitive biases. Some of these are actually defined as tested by psychologists, and some of these are more just categorical in that they've been identified as a problem, but there hasn't really been any data to back them up. But some of the most important ones is confirmation bias. And this is an episode of The Simpsons where it's kind of mocking the movie Rear Window, where if you've seen the movie or you've seen this episode, Bart thinks that Ned Flanders has killed his wife and buried her in the backyard, when in fact that wasn't the truth. But once we've kind of made a decision or an idea, we're gonna see evidence that backs up our idea. So we're effectively just like gathering evidence to just make sure that our idea is correct when there may be evidence to the contrary, but we tend to ignore it or cherry pick things that we like that back up our conclusions. Status quo bias, this happens a lot in website development. We tend to stick to the patterns that we know, we tend to stick to the technologies we know, we tend to stick to one mode of operation. This is just how people work, is that we tend to get in patterns and follow those patterns. Eat at the same restaurants, go to work, leave work at the same time, take the same route to work, all of these things. It's just kind of, it's comfortable and we know what's going on. And I found this was kind of funny today. I was driving up here. I commute to Ames from Des Moines every day, and so I'm just used to driving right by Ankeny. And so when I was about to make, looking at the exit, I was looking at the exit, and I just went right on by. Because, that's how we kind of just get in patterns, and we just kind of go on autopilot sometimes. Another one of these biases is the optimism bias. And we've seen this a lot of times. People are very optimistic about the outcome, especially when it's their idea or their plan. They're going to be a lot more optimistic than the person who has to come in and looks at their plan. Negativity bias, and this is just something people do, is we pay attention to bad news. On the evening news, we're going to pay more attention to the bad news than necessarily the good news. And this, again, is kind of this type 1, type 2 error thing. We're paying attention to things that can take things away from us rather than necessarily things that are going to have positive benefits to us. We do some processing of what's good and what's bad in the net outcome. Gambler's fallacy. This is a big one. This is kind of how some people view when they're at the casino pulling the slot machine or the cards. if we believe that a certain slot machine has paid out for us in the past, we're probably going to go to that slot machine. Or we follow that this worked last time, this design worked last time, or this technology worked last time, or this project management style worked last time. We're going to follow it because it worked in the past. And that's not necessarily true. It's just kind of how we view things. And this is a big one that I see, especially when making assumptions in web projects, is making correlation between two uncorrelated things. And that happens quite a bit, that we say, oh, well, we changed this on the website and our web traffic went up. When really it could have maybe been the season, time of the month, time of the day, some other event, maybe someone posted a link somewhere out on the website and you got more traffic, and that didn't necessarily have to be a change on your website. And so we don't necessarily take into account the fundamental underlying of why things happen. We just tend to make correlations because that's the easiest pattern that we see. So after we look at all of these different types of biases, there are plenty more out there. I mean, as I said, there's hundreds of them, and we make all sorts of mistakes when working. It's just most of those are pretty minor, and things tend to work out, and that our experience and things like that, working off patterns that have worked, are actually successful things, and we've identified them as successful. And most of the time, that the gambler's fallacy doesn't always play into effect if you understand the underlying premise. So it's really understanding what you're doing, and a lot of these, I recognize a lot of the biases early in my career, especially when I didn't have the experience, because you're operating on your intuition, not necessarily what you've experienced in the past and understood, like kind of had a true understanding of how like projects are built or design is built in technology. And so you're really just trying to kind of operate on what you know and what you feel rather than actually having been through it a few times. So I'm going to talk about how we can kind of look at taking care of some of these biases. So the biggest thing in mitigating bias and errors in web projects is feedback loops. Feedback loops are one of the most important things we can implement in our project and our web design. And one of the best known feedback loops is the scientific method. It's just a way to investigate things, get new knowledge, and essentially just see if something is correct. We see something happen, we want to find out if it's correct. If we change this, if we change the content on our homepage, did it really drive up traffic, or was that what happened? So we could go back and we could change the content back, and if the traffic didn't vary, well then it wasn't the content on our homepage that changed. So we can use the scientific method to kind of go through, and it's a feedback loop in of itself. So it's just basically we test something, we follow it, we have an experiment to test it, we analyze it and get a conclusion, and depending on the conclusion, we may go back and start all over again. And speaking of sources and credibility and the scientific method, this is one of my little favorite memes. This is called the Credible Hulk. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry because I always back up my rage with facts and documented sources. I had a project where basically we were talking about how links would open in a different page for a PDF, and I was arguing the point that the traditional way you do this is open up PDFs in a new window, and I wasn't getting anywhere, so I went and found some research from Jacob Nielsen about PDFs and links and set that on, and it was like, oh, well, okay, that makes sense. And I didn't really have to argue because I had backed up sources and research. So as I said, it's important to have credibility and ways to back things up and remove bias and conjecture from our design process. So another type of feedback loop is agile development. Agile development, along with Scrum and some other things, is really just a feedback loop. We're going through in 2-week sprints of creating things, whether that's design, creating a project plan, or things like that. If you do this agilely, you're going in 2-week increments, and you're looking back on every 2 weeks and see how things work to see if you need to change things in the process. So agile development is another feedback loop. And these are important because if we're not checking ourselves every so often, we don't know if we're really making mistakes. And especially if we kind of work in isolation for time periods, we really need other people to kind of view our work, demo, have a demo of something, shoot it by them, get another opinion on something. So I'm going to talk about some of the error correcting mechanisms in Agile. And one of the big ones is the concept of continuous improvement. And continuous improvement is something that I really believe in. I think it's something that really can kind of help you out personally in your career as well as an organization. So it's really a big concept that can be implemented locally as well. So the big thing is we want to identify suboptimal process and waste, remove waste via small changes. We don't want to make big radical changes. Improvement comes from the inside. So when we're talking about organization, it's going to come from the people who are doing the work rather than the people above. So it's really an organic type of movement. And this was really created in Japan to help improve their manufacturing industry. And they viewed that the people who were doing the work had the best concept of how to make it more efficient. And that's really how that they like, especially in the automotive industry, that they really, that a lot of these companies, they really grew exponentially was because they were following a lot of these and had a different management style that really varied from how things were going, and part of it was constantly improving. And so, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. And so, they viewed that that change is important to change the output and change these processes. And so if you view everything as like a process, you can figure out what the output is, and this really relates to a mathematical concept of functions or computer science functions. You have something that goes in and something that comes out, and you can change the actual function, change little variables, change how people work, and you can get different output. And the final big one on this is self and team introspection. So in Agile, we have something that's known as a retrospective, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But it's basically taking a look back of what you've done at the last couple of weeks. And so kind of bookending what I said before about that the 1% being success and 99% being failure. And this is really the truth, is that, when you start doing something, it's not going to be great, and you have to keep trying at it, and then you get a little better, and you get a little better. That's continuous improvement. It's not radically making gigantic changes, it's just changing little things till you find what works and what doesn't, and that's kind of how we gain experience. So if we look at our mental model of feedback loops, this is kind of a documented way of different feedback loops. The initial one is really, this is kind of how we start in our career. We're just getting information feedback from our supervisors, from the people we're producing products for. We're just getting feedback and making decisions. As you start to grow, you kind of create a better mental model of what's going on. You may have some rules for making decisions as you've done this a few times. You kind of gain some experience in it, and you're able to, kind of use the feedback loop a little better. Once you really become to the point of mastery of something, you're able to change the mental model. And this kind of goes on as you're growing in your design development, whatever your business is. You eventually get to a point where you become more flexible in how you make things. So you can pivot and move and change how you're doing things to meet the needs of your business, your customers, your managers, your team, however it is. And so coming back to those mental models, the retrospective is designed in Agile, is designed to kind of get past that initial point of just making decisions, and even getting people who haven't been doing it as long the ability to receive experience from their team members, and everyone contributes in a retrospective. So in Agile, after a 2-week sprint, you have a retrospective, and you kind of go, what should we stop doing, what should we start doing, what should we keep doing, and really, you have a whole team, and the team is the only ones involved in this, and usually you'll have a mediator, and the team allows to change their own process, so they really have control of what they're doing. So everyone gets experience, so a senior member can tell a junior member, hey, I've been through this before, you know, this is something that's gonna help you out if you start doing this. And maybe the junior member who has a new, fresh perspective on something can say, hey, I've noticed that the organization does this, maybe we could start doing this. And it really allows the team to receive feedback and change as they need to, and pivot. And so another point in Agile is, as I talked about earlier, is communication. And in Agile, you have a couple of different ways and communication points. So multiple times per day, a team should be talking amongst themselves in hallways, things like that. You know, whether that's by chat or just stopping by someone's desk and saying, hey, I'm working on this, what's your idea? You know, yada, yada, yada. And then that's a sort of mini feedback loop. Then you have longer feedback loops of a day. So usually in Scrum, in Agile, the team will meet every day. And it's a stand-up, it's 15 minutes, and you just talk about what you're going to do, what you did, what you're going to do, and any other roadblocks or things that you have. So you can kind of touch base with everyone. If someone needs help, they can ask for help or, you know, pick someone's brain. And then the other thing you should be doing is a longer feedback cycle is a demo or status meetings, and you should be doing these a couple of times in an iteration so you can show what you're working on so people can see it and make comments, provide feedback, so you can change it earlier rather than later in the process. And then also important, you know, every day you're doing the stand-ups, well, you're going to want to have status meetings with stakeholders every so often, and so maybe that's once an iteration, maybe it's sometimes less frequently, but the goal is you're always in communication with the important people in the process. Less frequently, and this is something that we kind of like to avoid in Agile, is high-level project planning. That's going to happen, but we're not going to be doing that all the time. And sometimes we also need to have course corrections. If all of a sudden we realize that the expectations are not matching up or the expectations are changed, sometimes we have to have a major course correction and we need to have a big meeting on it. So really, Agile is all part of this big feedback loop. And that's how, you know, websites can get built, where you avoid all of the problems of something getting built and people going, that's not what I asked for, is if you're constantly touching base, everyone should kind of have a feel. The idea is to avoid this black box of development that happens over 2 months and then demoing something. If you're not demoing, you know, quite frequently, then that's where the disconnect can happen. And so, you know, even that applies not just to actually building the software, that applies to the design. Where are we on time? I'm running a little long here. And I'm going to kind of jump through this now because I'm getting kind of close to the end here. The criticisms of Agile, sometimes the high-level design isn't there. So as you're doing design in every 2 weeks, rather than high-level design, and kind of have people steering the process all the time and one big project flow. Sometimes what gets built is kind of a hodgepodge, like this car. The many small iterations kind of sometimes don't build the whole product that you may have envisioned. You get smaller pieces that are put together through iterations, and you may not come back and clean all of that up into one big cleanup project to make it a smooth project. Scope creep is embraced, so like that car, you can have changes come in every 2 weeks, and you may not have as much control over additional features getting added, or features may get added that are viewed as high level but weren't necessarily part of what they identified initially. I mean, that's a good thing, is being able to pivot and add features, but it can create sometimes Frankenstein's monsters. Also, the other big thing is Agile is really bad at providing time estimates, but that's how it's built. And so when you're working on projects by like a project sale or selling a project at one price, Agile has an immediate disconnect with that, unless you say, we're going to spend this much money, we're going to touch base with you every 2 weeks, we can change the project as we need, and then when we get to this point, we'll decide what to do. It's really hard to sell whole projects as a feature set with Agile. I mean, it is possible, but that's not what Agile is designed to build. Agile is designed to build software in iterations rather than giant projects. It can build giant projects, and it can build giant projects really well, and assumes you're going to change, but the estimation part is one of those things that doesn't exactly line up very well. Okay, so bringing this all back to the website design process. So the design process is made up of a few major steps, and the development process has a few major steps. We're going to talk about just kind of some do's and don'ts for these. And if we don't make it through everything, this slide share is up there to get through these. You're going to want to define general roles and hats for everyone. You don't necessarily want to invite everyone to the first meeting. You want to invite the people who are going to help define those roles, and then invite everyone in. And with those roles, you have to assume that people don't necessarily know what they're doing on a project. And this is kind of clear on website projects, especially if you're working with different clients. Clients don't necessarily know what their role is in the process. They may just assume that you're building it, you'll build it, and they won't have to worry about anything. When many times they're adding content, doing lots of important factors. Maybe they're doing content entry on the site, so they need to be trained earlier in development so they can start making content entry. So you have to make sure everyone has kind of some general roles and responsibilities for the project and define those, so you know who to contact when you need something done. So you need with that, you make a rough communication plans, maybe on Wiki or an online document, and that's malleable and can be changed. Treat the kickoff meeting as just another process. You don't want to be doing that. You want to build this as a separate individual project, as just not another project. You want to have support and passion for the project, especially from the people doing it. So you have to make sure that the project is going to be something that's going to succeed and everyone's going to enjoy working on it. In the planning phase, you want to make sure you have a big picture and how business goals fit into it, and let everyone know. Because that's one of the things that I've seen is sometimes projects, people don't necessarily tell you why this project's important, just that they need this project. And that's something that kind of irks me as someone who likes to view the big high level of things. I want to know how things fit into it, so when I'm making decisions in the project, I need to ask questions. I know what the expectations are of what is needed. You really don't want to ignore the end users. This is something that I've seen many times, is that projects are only viewed with the business interests and not making this a comfortable website for users to use. They're just like, well, we need them, we want to make sales, or we want to provide information. Not, how can I get my users to this information the best way as possible, or how can I guide users to make the sales process better? These are things that I notice doesn't necessarily happen in the initial project. UX has become a bigger importance when developing websites, so this is less and less common, but it still happens. You want to at least have some sort of data on your users. You want to have some research on how users react with your website, what your traffic is, what your important content is. If you don't have these things up front, you're not ready to do planning. And so there's some research that definitely needs to be done before building a website. You need to have some demographic information, and you want to find out information on other websites, maybe some white papers on goals and how people react with this type of activity. I'm going to move ahead here. In design, one of the big things that I've seen that's a problem is big design up front, or creating the creative process as one giant set of pages, or one giant document, or one giant Photoshop file, or one giant mockup, rather than kind of treating it iteratively. And so that's one of the things that I've seen design projects have a big problem with, because if you're going and making changes, you have to make changes throughout the whole design, rather than kind of hammering out those changes early in the process with one or two designs and then adding everything else in. And you don't want to let the visual design lead the information architecture or the content that's on the site. You kind of want to have that hammered out before you go into your visual design, because maybe maybe the designer only made enough room for 5 menu items in a menu bar, but you're going to have 7. I've seen that happen I don't know how many times, and that's something that really needs to be focused on, is you need to kind of have your content, or at least what your content's going to be looked at before you really get into the design process. I mean, you can have mock-ups, but a lot of times the content doesn't fit those mock-ups, so if those aren't aligned, you're going to have a bad day. Don't start each new page from scratch, so you should really have a style guide, some sort of templates, things like that. So your designers aren't making new pages every time, so if they go back and update a design, it can update a whole bunch of documents. There's plenty of software out that does that, something like Acture or something like that, where you can update a single template and everything else gets updated, so you don't have to go back and change it. That's a big one that I've seen slow down the design process incredibly. Are we at time? Okay, so I'll just finish up as quickly as I can. In the build process, don't put all your eggs in the build process. So you should have plenty of time in design and development and testing and deployment. You just want to make sure that all the legs of the table are there, that you're not just focusing on one thing too much. A lot of times I've seen projects where all the estimation is in the build phase, but nothing's put into the other sections or the other buckets. Deployment, this is more of a developer thing, and this is, you want to let the business users define when deployments happen, when software is ready to go. So you just want to make sure that the developers have an automated process where they can just push a button, the website is deployed when the business users need it to happen. That's a big one that I see a lot of times. Technical teams are the ones that decide when the deployments are going to happen, even though features may have been ready for a couple of weeks. So embrace change, embrace failure. I mean, you're gonna fail, you're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna have mental biases. Understand this and use feedback loops to kind of embrace it and make changes in your own workflow. Thank you. I guess we're almost wrapped up with DrupalCon 2014. I think we have, another session and then the final closing keynote, and then the sprints tomorrow.
This is it.
This is it? Okay.
I think we can wrap up.
Okay, excellent. Well, then I better get everyone out of here.